Part two of the Curency project is the processing power of Curency. It is estimated that there are 5 billion cell phones in production, in circulation today, with about 200, 300 million of them being smartphones. And over time, you're going to see that the billions of people that are on this planet are going to have a cell phone, a smartphone, something that is bigger, better, badder than what we consider state-of-the-art today the rest of the world will have in 5 years. You know, I mean, if you think of just Moore's Law and the iterations that every 18 to 24 months the transistors are still doubling, you start looking at, you know, products, and you start looking at other technologies in the peripheral markets and the embedded chip market, you start seeing that in 5 to 10 years the technology is still going to be peaking, and what's going to wind up happening is we're going to have 5 billion really smart computers sitting on people's waistbands and in their pocketbooks for a good period of time. So as Curency becomes the largest body of knowledge of bioinformatics data, you start looking at all that information that's coming in, because we're using these cell phones to collect as much information as we possibly can, and that's only going to be dictated by the growth in the peripheral market and the technology growth in that peripheral cell phone technology capture market. It's going to be, we're going to have dynamic information coming in from millions of people. And let's say that day one starts in 2015 on January 1. And let's say that day one is the baseline where we have 500,000 people volunteering. And it all came from the smartphone app on Android or smartphone app on Apple. And they got together and they said, you know, we can do this. And there's some companies out there that have created the peripherals that tie into the cell phone, and they're like, we're into this too. And it wouldn't take a lot. It wouldn't take a lot of money. But what could wind up happening is the impact could be amazing. The impact would be that we could start day one capturing this dynamic body of knowledge and recording it. And that's really what we need to be focusing on, is how do we collect all this information at once? How do we collect it all? How do we collect it, and what do we do once we have it collected? How do we process it? And that's where these cell phones come in. So let's say 10 years from now, we have all this data that we've created through the other phones, the other peripherals. They didn't have to be super smart. But now that we have some really, really, really smart phones, they have some really beefy processing power, probably a lot stronger than the desktops and laptops that we're using today. So let's start looking at that. Let's start looking as a benchmark the SETI distributed computing model. And it starts to come together. All of a sudden, we could take all of these cell phones and tap into their unused processing, like SETI does with the radio telescope, looking for discernible patterns to suggest extraterrestrial intelligence. We could turn every cell phone into the computer processing as well as the computer information intake of all our bioinformatics. So we're capturing all this bioinformatics, and simultaneously we're allowing everything to be processed. And because we're all networked together, if we need processing power on a specific area, we can direct the firepower directly to that entity. So really it allows us to find and blaze trails where we never thought we could blaze trails before. And this is what we can do. We can identify, using information, that kind of vast amount of collection of information, dynamic sets over 25 years, and the ability of having billions of computers being able to process those data sets in real time and not in real time, to figure out patterns, to see things. You could look at the information as the stars. You could look at the cell phones as the radio towers, and you could see the processing doing one thing, turning the radio telescope and turning it into a radio microscope, where the information becomes the ability of us to triangulate the mechanism of action of disease, the mechanism of action of molecular biology, the enzyme reactions. We would be able to use information as a refractor in order to see the plasmorphic activity rather than just recording it as a segment. We can use not financial, but data modeling, which came from the financial market and was based on fractal physiology and random walk. We could wind up adhering to this. We could wind up discovering the mechanism of action of disease. So watch. We now have this database, and this database is now growing. And it's growing because we're collecting all of this data, which now has the ability of being processed. That's the second element that we have, is that we could enter into a financial arrangement for the intake. We could enter into a financial arrangement for the processing using Curency. And the reason being is because we are making the processing power and the data information exchange commodities which fuel this microeconomy. And this microeconomy which we are creating is a best practice organization using the bioinformatics capture and innovation of its newfound treasury to find the roads that lead to the cure. And people will say that is a really bold statement. And it is. It's an incredibly bold statement. And I ground it in this belief and why I think we can wind up seeing something amazing in our lifetime. And I don't know how amazing, but it's what fuels my passion every morning. It's what I go to bed every night. It's what I've lived and breathed for the last 8.5 years. It's my purpose in life. It's my soul. It is the hardest job I've ever had in my life, and it is the most amazing opportunity that I've ever seen, ever. It comes down to this. When my dad was sick, you're looking for hope anywhere. And what I saw was a scientific phenomenon known as spontaneous cancer remission. First documented case, 1385. Catholic bishop comes out to give a priest who's dying of bone cancer his last rites, comes back 6 months later to say a prayer on the priest's grave, asked the town where he's buried. Everyone looked at him and said, "So Father so-and-so is in the vineyard picking grapes." And lo and behold, the first documented case of spontaneous cancer remission. So it's considered incredibly rare, 125,000 cases. Someone's in stage 4 and goes into 0. Well, let's just say that we have 500,000 people day one. In day one, everyone's giving their everyone's giving their bioinformatic information, which has financial value. In return for the Curency that is established in the release, that they Like you could use the miner system in Bitcoin much the same way that you could use the bioinformatics. That your input of bioinformatics gives you points. It's a lottery system, or some scenario of release for consideration of to where it sustains the market. So micropayment probably is the smartest play to where you get 1/1,000,000th of a Curency. All right, there's 44 million units. Your goal is to get, if you could ever get your hand on one, that's a big deal, right? So what it all boils down to is all your activity over the time earns you a coin, which might be 1 year of bioinformatic capture. Okay, so let's look at that and put it into a model and start looking at the way that we could wind up creating the pro forma of standing up the value of what a Curency unit would actually be. So, you look at what if scenario of 500,000 people, 500,000 people with processing power, 500,000 people signed into some type of iPhone, Android app. And from that, they're part of the Curency program, and we issue a coin a month for their input, their bioinformatic input. And as the network grows, and we start, adding more coins and more coins and more coins, basically through the concept of inflation, we'll wind up creating a tipping point, which will allow us to readjust the value of our Curency based on market demand. And that would be our tipping point. And that probably would be 10 to 15 million coins. Something, right? I mean, and here's the beauty of this. We can draft off Bitcoin's success. There's a lot of models. There's a lot of evidence. This has been recorded in a transparent world thanks to the internet, which allows us really to develop some amazing competitive intelligence and to see what it would take in order to create this tipping point. But we get to the tipping point. The tipping point, we got 500,000 people day one inputting their bioinformatic information right down the street. 5 years from now, we got 1 million people. 10 years from now, we got 5 million people. So the network grows, and the network's going to grow for other reasons. But the reason why this network will start growing is now that you have all this bioinformatic capture. In the Cure-ncy model, we also have the ability of allowing people now to capture through a question and answer engine experiences of cancer survivors, cancer caretakers, volunteers, and other experts sharing their experience according to the expertise which it is so called. So let's say that I'm a claims adjuster for United Healthcare, and I know how to deal with their paperwork on denial of claim because that's part of their system, right? And I want to share my ability of helping the United Healthcare cancer patients on how they can get past it, and I upload a United Healthcare denial of claim form appeal letter that bypasses their attrition policy by 3 weeks, and you just sped up the cycle 3 weeks and they hate it. But it would take someone really to dig down to figure that out, but that's my expertise. I know how to get claims paid. Or some other volunteer bringing their expertise into that environment, as well as cancer survivors bringing their hindsight, their expertise of how they viewed and valued certain lifestyle changes and adaptations that they made, how that impacted them, to serve as a compass for the cancer patient to develop a best practice guide on how to view and manage his cancer, while at the same time empowering that person to understand that by being proactive, they're not a statistic, at the intersection of friends and family that all understand that if we can help increase your quality of life, we can help you medically, and we know how to do that without being a hindrance via the one-way communication that you can enjoy with a social network. So what we've done is we've laid the foundation to where Cancer-IM could be the place where everyone with cancer adopts the Curency concept, that they give their bioinformatic information for Curency, they give their experiences in interviews and volunteer work in the community by sharing their expertise in different areas, and they get Curency points for that as well. And the reason being is that all of that information is the dynamic body of knowledge. So it's not just the bioinformatics that is captured by the peripherals, it's the bioinformatics and the qualitative part that's captured in the social network. How they feel, what was their stress levels, what, where was their anxiety, where was the psychosocial aspect, which is so discounted in the modern medical theater. So we get to this point to where we have 500,000 people that have been on this network for a period of time. And let's say that period of time is 5 years. So we have 500,000 people, cancer survivors, cancer patients, and they're volunteers, people that don't have cancer. So let's say that we have 500,000 cancer patients, we have 500,000 survivors, and we have 500,000 people that when they started this, they did not have cancer. Now, 5 years, we have a bioinformatic database of 500,000 people, 5 years deep, with a tremendous amount of index data and how it came in. So we have dynamic tagging. With that said, we could use that information and use the power of distributed computing through the back-end part of the processing of our Curency model to act as the radio microscope in searching the sea of data, finding the mechanism of action of molecular biology. We can use that information as our refractor. We can identify the mechanism of action of disease. And even if that sounds crazy, let's go in its most conservative form. It's going to open the way for where research needs to be focused. It's also going to introduce physics at the helm of where this needs to be in science. The biochemical dominance of medicine needs to take a second seat to physics. If it doesn't, countries, financial institutions, orders we know is going to collapse under the basis of our healthcare system. It's a simple economic reality. Simple economic reality that we have to figure out best practices and get these diseases under control. We have to. And the way to do it is through bioinformatics, leading the way for physics to capture the leading dominance in an industry which is dominated by the biochemical industry. Biochemistry is splitting woods, and we know how to split atoms. It's ludicrous. And the methodologies on how we're doing research is archaic. We have intellectual property that is the center of profit generators, which is stifling innovation. And any industry that has a drug that is 16 years old, that's their #1 selling horse, in any other industry would be a dinosaur. They'd be out of business. And on the flip side, that's the devastating effect of allowing biochemistry to have dominance over healthcare with intellectual property protection the way that it is. It has to be open sourced. It has to be led with physics. Biochemistry has a seat at that table, and they should. I mean, they're an incredibly valid science. They're just not the cure. And you don't have to look any further than the FDA disclosure language. Although the mechanism of action is unknown, the following effects have been observed and recorded. So we now have Curency at part 3. Part 3, Curency. Part 3 of Curency deals with the financial innovation that it finances. You have 22 million coins out of the 44 million that go out to get processing power and that get bioinformatic data. And as those instruments come in, we're using the 22 million coins to back the reserve value of those coins. But those reserve coins, and it's, you'll be in the charter, although there's money there, the money is going to cancer research. 100%. All initial money issued on the Curency as it's issued is going directly into the Curency Cancer Research Fund. And what we wind up doing on that is we wind up creating in the bylaws, and we vote it in and it's elected, what we're going to do with that. One of the things is that it could be a venture capital firm incubating technology utilizing the data set, which is probably a very prudent, valid model and would force the ability of adhering to the ethics of Curency probably in a faster, quicker manner, and using that as a way of stamping it. So creating a venture capital firm based off the other 22 million coins that are not being issued. Those are the coins that are being issued to the reserve of Curency and how they want to use those, as well as the coins that are issued from the initial Curency distribution, whether it's for content in the form of bioinformatics or processing, or in open market transactions, which would be basically an auction-based release of currency into the market, very similar to the Fed Open Auction Committee auctioning off T-bills. Obviously not as sophisticated, but nonetheless probably the same mechanism of action done through kind of like an eBay meets E-Trade. Basically I want to buy a Curency unit. I want to sell a Curency unit. So, what winds up happening is all introduction of Curency is going to be 100% transparent. It's going to be 100% centralized. It'll be 100% government sanctioned through the governing body that's managing it, which will have to adhere to the preamble in which the community establishes the importance of this having to be open source. That's the caveat. It has to be open source. Everything has to be open, everything has to be transparent, and it has to finance people's spirit to find the cure. Let's finance someone's heart. Let's finance the ability of someone having a crazy idea and taking it to a point where you could be the 15-year-old kid who develops the pancreatic cancer test, to some kid who might see a mechanism of action dealing with peanut butter and a certain strain of mushroom, and the enzyme reaction that it creates with people with B positive blood in liver of non-alcoholic parents. Wow. What I'm saying is that this information, with its permission, based application based on its transparency allows this information to be governed by a completely altruistic society outside of any corruptible mechanism. That has to be its first and foremost platform. Anything less would be, it'd be a tragedy of its potential. Now the part is on the remaining Curency units. Financing a venture capital firm is a very smart play. Another smart play is offering it as a prize for, kind of like the X Prize, first person in space. You could say the person who cures cancer, make it an economic incentive tool, or turn it into a financing best practice scenario where, like the Nobel Prize, to where you are rewarding scientific innovation through a competitive, transparent interaction, which we'd be able to see because they'd be logged into our data set. They'd be data set partners. And what it would get down to is there would be a lot of issues that would need to be managed in a completely transparent, best practices way, with, most importantly, having no ability of being corrupted by any financial mechanism. And the reason being is that the second you do, you're going to sour the well of its potential. And its potential is that data set could wind up being the way that we identify the mechanism of action of spontaneous cancer remission. Let's think about this. You got 500,000 people, 5 years of data. Spontaneous cancer remission is 1 in 100,000. So you have 5 people with 5 years of data that have gone through spontaneous cancer remission. And we have all of this data. Imagine if we took all of that data of those 5 people that survived cancer and took all of their data and turned it inside out and gave it to 5 billion cell phones to figure out the equation. What is the equation? What is the pattern? What is the formula? That's the potential that I see with Curency. And that's why it's so critical that we have a best partners collaboration in accounting, in clinical resource organizations, in doing investigational new drugs, in public relations, in legal, in creating a congressional mandate, a committee like the International Cancer Congress, something that is based on a purpose, and that purpose is to develop a roadmap, a pathway leading to the cure of disease. Let's find the mechanism. Bioinformatics represents the ability of using those radio waves compounded with the processing power of billions of cell phones. We have a really good shot of using that information to find new ways to find research and new pathways. And I truly believe, and this is why this is my advocation, is we could find the mechanism of action of disease through this instrument.